The fluorescent lights hummed with a clinical, predatory persistence, vibrating against the base of my skull. The room smelled of lemon oil and old paper, the sterile scent of institutional erasure. My father sat at the front of the gallery, a monument to old money precision. His suit was a charcoal pinstripe, tailored so sharply it could draw blood, his silver hair groomed into a weapon of respectability. Arthur Fletcher didn't need to raise his voice to dismantle a life. He spoke in a whisper that carried the weight of a gavel. "It is a tragedy of the highest order," he said, his voice smooth as aged scotch. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge, as if I were a stain he was apologizing for. "But the woman sitting before you is not the daughter we raised. She never served. She was never a handler. She spent those years in a manic haze, and when she returned, she stole our name to clothe her delusions." The jolt hit me in the solar plexus, a visceral theft of every mile I had walked in the dust. 10 years of service, 3 tours, and a chest full of medals I wasn't allowed to mention, all reduced to a manic haze by the man who taught me to walk. I sat alone at my table, no lawyer, no files. My records had been locked behind a level 5 seal I couldn't break, leaving me a ghost in a room full of machinery. My mother sat behind Arthur, her pearls glowing under the harsh lights, her silence acting as the final nail in my coffin. I could feel the tremor starting deep beneath my skin, a rhythmic vibration of rage and betrayal, but I kept my hands flat on the wood. Stoicism was the only armor I had left. "She is a danger to the animal," Arthur concluded, his tone clipped and final, "and a danger to herself." I lifted my head, my gaze traveling past my father's cold triumph to the bench. Judge Harrison Sterling sat there, his face a mask of judicial granite. But as our eyes met, the world slowed. He held my gaze a fraction of a second longer than the law required, a flicker of recognition that defied the polished lies of the Fletcher name. In that silent, jagged moment, the blue marble wasn't just a memory, it was a promise. The fluorescent lights hummed with a clinical, predatory persistence, vibrating against the base of my skull. The room smelled of lemon oil and old paper, the sterile scent of institutional erasure. I sat at the petitioner's table, my spine a rigid vertical line of military-grade steel. I didn't lean against the mahogany chair. I didn't fidget. I remained perfectly still, a habit born from years of standing watch in places where movement was an invitation to a sniper. To the judge, I was a tragic variable. To my father, I was a ghost he was finally exorcising. Arthur Fletcher sat at the front of the gallery, a monument to old money precision. His suit was a charcoal pinstripe, tailored so sharply it could draw blood, his silver hair groomed into a weapon of respectability. He didn't need to raise his voice to dismantle a life. He spoke in a whisper that carried the weight of a gavel. "My daughter is a hero," Arthur's voice boomed, filling the high-vaulted chamber with a resonance that sounded like a broadcast from a foreign land. To the gallery, he was the grieving patriarch. To me, he was a stranger performing a play. "But heroes break, Your Honor. Catherine has been lost in the fog of her service since she returned. She is erratic, she is hypervigilant. She spent those years in a manic haze, and when she returned, she stole our name to clothe her delusions. She is a danger to the animal and to herself." The jolt hit me in the solar plexus, a visceral theft of every mile I had walked in the dust. 10 years, 3 tours, and a chest full of medals I wasn't allowed to mention, all reduced to a manic haze by the man who taught me to walk. I didn't defend myself. My silence wasn't a confession of guilt, it was a tactical survival mechanism. While my father's lawyer presented doctored medical reports, my mind retreated to the grit. I wasn't in the courtroom anymore. I was back in the 110-degree heat of the Kandahar perimeter. I could smell the sharp, metallic tang of burnt copper and ionized air, the scent that lingers after a breach charge peels the door off a compound. I heard the rhythmic, heavy panting of Bain, his wet fur smelling of dust, and dried sweat as we cleared a path through an IED-riddled village. I felt the phantom weight of the trauma kit on my thigh, the jagged edge of a medical shear pressing against my skin. A pop, a light bulb flickered in the hallway outside. In my mind, it was a primer igniting. I felt the tremor start deep beneath my skin, a rhythmic vibration of rage and betrayal, but I kept my hands flat on the wood. Stoicism was the only armor I had left. I looked toward the back of the gallery. Judge Harrison Sterling sat there, his civilian suit sharp, but his eyes held a clarity that didn't belong in a civil hearing. He wasn't watching my father, he was watching me. He was measuring the distance between who I was and who they said I was. 3 years ago, in a world screaming with mortar fire and the smell of burnt metal, I had pulled his son from a crumpled transport. I remembered the boy's terrified eyes and the small blue marble I'd found in his pocket while I packed a shrapnel wound. I had whispered a single, non-regulation phrase into the radio to confirm the target's identity to the overhead drone. The blue marble is in the pocket. Now in this sterile room, Sterling's hand twitched on the armrest of his chair. He knew. He was the only honest mirror in a room full of smoke. But as the presiding judge hammered the gavel, granting Arthur temporary guardianship of my assets, including Bane, I realized the validation gap was now a canyon. Arthur walked over as the room began to clear. He placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder for the benefit of the cameras. The sandalwood scent of his cologne was suffocating, trying to mask the rot. "It's for your own good, Catherine," he whispered. I didn't look at him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a glare or a plea. I just stared at the empty space where my life used to be. My records were locked. My partner was gone. I was alone at the table with no lawyer and no files. "I'm on time, Arthur," I said, my voice low and dry, like dead leaves on pavement. He didn't argue. He just looked at me with a pity that felt like a death sentence and walked away. He thought he had won because he held the paper. He didn't realize that in the field, paper doesn't stop a bullet, and a lie doesn't stop a dog who knows the scent of his own. The spring was compressed. The debt was recorded. Now, I just had to survive the silence until the uncoiling began. 48 hours later, the systematic erasure of Catherine Fletcher was in full effect. I stood on the edge of the Fletcher estate, a sprawling glass and stone monument to my father's ego. The sunset cast long, jagged shadows across the lawn, making the house look like a fortress under siege. My credit cards had been flagged for suspicious activity. My access to the Veterans Health Portal was locked behind a red "Under Review" banner. Arthur wasn't just taking my partner, he was deleting my existence from the civilian grid. He was turning me into a ghost before I was even dead. I walked toward the sunroom, my boots silent on the manicured path. My muscles felt tight, coiled. I was tracking the perimeter by instinct, my eyes scanning the high windows for movement, my ears filtering the rustle of the oak trees. Habit is a heavy thing. Inside, the air was climate-controlled and smelled of lilies, too sweet, like a funeral parlor. I saw my sister, Beatrice, standing near the center of the room. She was struggling with Bane, trying to force him into a decorative leather harness encrusted with silver studs. It was an insult to his training. A leash designed for a pet, for a trophy, for something that didn't know the weight of a mission. Bane stood rigid. His ears were pinned forward, his eyes tracking the room with a professional's cold detachment. He wasn't looking at the organic treats Beatrice was waving in his face. He was scanning for threats. He was waiting for a command that wasn't coming. "You have to admit, he looks much more approachable now, Kat," Beatrice said. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my hands, her own fingers trembling slightly as she fumbled with the buckle. "You need to learn to be a sister again, not a soldier. We're only trying to help you transition. Dad says the structure will be good for you." I didn't answer. I didn't give her the sisterly moment she was fishing for. I just watched Bane. The silver studs on the harness caught the light, a bright, metallic flash. It hit me like a physical blow. The glare triggered a memory of a sun-bleached road outside Fallujah, the flash of sunlight off a hidden pressure plate. My heart hammered once hard against my ribs. I breathed through it, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. "He's not a pet, Beatrice," I said. My voice was flat, a low vibration that seemed to startle the room. "He's a sensor. If you clip that onto him, you're dampening his tactile response. You're blindfolding his skin." Beatrice laughed, a short, dismissive sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Always so dramatic, Catherine. It's just a dog, he'll adjust. Animals always do." I didn't argue. There was no point in explaining the years of conditioning, the thousands of hours of bond building. I looked past her, toward the hallway. My brother-in-law, Julian, was standing in the shadows of the library. He refused to cross the threshold into the sunroom while Bain was present. He wasn't annoyed or impatient. He was terrified. He stayed back, his hand hovering near the small of his back, his gaze darting toward the basement door, a door painted the same muted cream as the walls, meant to disappear into the architecture. Bain's focus shifted. His head tilted a fraction of an inch, his nostrils flaring. He had caught something. I watched Julian's face go pale in the dim light of the hall. He realized the dog was staring directly at him. "Catherine, dear, you're staring," Beatrice said. "Why don't you go to your room?" I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Julian until he turned away, retreating further into the dark of the house. "I'm staying in the SUV," I said. "Don't be absurd, Dad won't like that." "Dad doesn't have to like it." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back at Bain, though I could feel his eyes on my spine. I wasn't being erased because I was broken or unstable. I was being erased because I was the only one in this house who knew how to spot a breach. The cracks in the mirror were widening. I could see the rot. Now, I just had to wait for the glass to shatter. The interior of my SUV was a cramped sanctuary of glowing screens and the smell of stale coffee. Outside the reinforced glass, the Fletcher estate was a silhouette of opulence against a starless sky. Inside, I was back in the box, the tactical mobile command centers where I had spent half my adult life. I sat with the laptop balanced on the center console, the blue light reflecting off my retinas and illuminating the jagged scar that ran from my temple to my jawline. I attempted to pull my own deployment records. I entered a 16-digit override code that should have opened any door in the Department of Defense's personnel database. I needed the unredacted logs of Bain's certifications to prove in the next hearing that he was a piece of federal equipment, not a domestic pet. I hit the enter key. The screen blinked once, then bathed the cabin in a harsh crimson glare. Level 5 restriction. My breath hitched. This was beyond Arthur's reach. A Level 5 lock meant my files had been moved to a sensitive compartmented information facility server. To the rest of the world, Catherine Fletcher no longer had a history. I was being airbrushed out of existence by a hand much larger and colder than my father's. I looked through the windshield at the house. Julian was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library. He was pacing, a burner phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing toward that basement door. He looked like a man drowning in shallow water. I opened a secondary window, bypassing the local node to tap into Bain's secondary biometric feed, a low-frequency transmitter hidden inside his subcutaneous ID chip. The telemetry populated in clean, sharp columns. Heart rate, 62 BPM, respiration, steady. But then I saw the anomaly. A rhythmic interference pattern was spiking across the data stream every 12 seconds. It was a signal jammer, high-yield and industrial grade, located somewhere beneath the Fletcher sunroom. The realization hit me with a sensory jolt. A flicker of static on the screen, a high-pitched whine in my ears that most people wouldn't hear. It triggered the memory of a checkpoint outside Ramadi. The air had tasted like ozone and scorched rubber. I wasn't just being erased because Arthur found me inconvenient. I was being erased because I had brought a biological supersensor into a house that was functioning as a black market hub. The validation gap wasn't just a family disagreement, it was a security breach. My father thought he was managing a difficult daughter. He didn't realize he was housing a fuse. I leaned back, the heat of the laptop burning through my jeans. My eyes stayed on Julian. He was still talking, still sweating. He thought he was safe behind the Fletcher name and the glass walls. He didn't know that Bain's heart rate was currently synced to my own, a steady, rhythmic countdown. I closed the laptop halfway. The blue glow died, leaving me in the dark. I didn't need the files anymore. I had the signal. In the field, you don't wait for permission to engage a hostile frequency. You move to the source. I reached for the door handle, my movements silent and economical. The weight of the silence in the SUV felt like a loaded weapon. I wasn't the broken one. I was the only one who was actually awake. I stepped out into the night. The gravel didn't even crunch under my boots. I was Catherine Fletcher, and I was officially off the grid. Now, the mission was the only thing that existed. The heavy oak door of Arthur's study groaned as I pushed it open. It was a weighted sound, the kind that belongs to a room where secrets are kept behind expensive molding. The air inside was a suffocating mix of sandalwood and aged scotch, a fragrance designed to project stability while masking the rot beneath. Arthur Fletcher didn't look up from his mahogany desk. He was a monument to his own ego, surrounded by framed commendations from senators and photographs with governors. He was busy scrawling his signature onto a series of legal documents with a gold fountain pen, the nib scratching across the paper like a scavenger's claw. "I've made arrangements, Catherine," he said. His voice was a smooth, practiced baritone, but there was a tremor in the lower register he couldn't quite smooth out. He finally looked up. For a split second, the mask of the powerful patriarch slipped. His eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them translucent and gray. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who had realized the tiger he'd been riding was getting hungry. He slid a leather-bound checkbook across the polished wood toward me. On top of it sat a deed. "The court has already granted me guardianship," he continued, regaining his footing. "But I'd prefer we handle this with some dignity. Sign the permanent transfer of Bain's ownership to Beatrice. In exchange, I'm giving you the deed to the ranch in Wyoming, 20,000 acres, fully staffed. A trust fund that will ensure you never have to work or speak again." I didn't touch the book, I didn't even look at the check. I looked at the pen in his hand. The way the light caught the gold trim reminded me of the brass casings littering the floor of a Humvee. Suddenly, the smell of the room changed. The sandalwood vanished, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of burnt metal. My skin felt tight, a phantom pressure against my ribs where my plates should have been. I wasn't in a study in Connecticut. I was back in the dust, watching a man try to buy his way out of a firefight that had already started. "Is this what it costs to buy a daughter's soul, Dad?" My voice was low, dry. "Or is this just the price Julian told you to pay?" Arthur Fletcher's hand jerked. The fountain pen slipped, leaving a jagged ink blot on the stationery. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he roared, but it was hollow. He leaned over the desk, his knuckles white as he pressed them into the leather top. "You're seeing ghosts because that's all you know how to do. This is about family." I took a step forward, entering his personal space. I saw the sweat beading at his hairline. "Beatrice doesn't know how to handle a dog like Bain. He's not security for her. He's a threat to whatever Julian is hiding in that basement. You're not protecting her, Arthur. You're guarding a vault." "Enough," he reached out, as if to grab my arm, then thought better of it. He saw something in my eyes, the cold, calculated readiness of a handler who has already identified the target. "You're an embarrassment, Catherine. Take the ranch. Go to Wyoming." I backed away, the smell of the sandalwood returned, sickeningly sweet. I realized then that my father wasn't the architect of this erasure. He was the first victim. "The blue marble is in the pocket, Arthur," I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't take the check, I didn't take the deed. I left the door open, the draft from the hallway chilling the room. I headed for the stairs. The spring was winding tighter. The validation gap wasn't just a distance anymore, it was a fuse, and it had just been lit. The night was a void of cold dampness. It pressed against the windows of the SUV, blurring the edges of the Fletcher estate until the house looked like a sinking ship in a dark sea. I sat in the driver's seat, the dashboard lights dimmed to a ghostly amber. My ribs ached with a dull, throbbing pressure, a psychosomatic echo of the phantom weight of my tactical vest. I felt naked without the ceramic plates. I felt exposed, without the familiar tether of Bain's lead in my hand. I had bypassed the estate's firewall 10 minutes ago. It was a task that felt like cutting through wet paper. My screen was a chaotic tapestry of telemetry. I watched the movement logs, my eyes tracking the data in wireframe. Twist, Bain wasn't just barking at the physical presence of Julian. He was responding to a high-frequency acoustic pulse emanating from the basement. Julian had installed an industrial-grade signal jammer, but it was leaking. The mystery of my locked files finally clicked into place. The DoD's Level 5 protocol hadn't been triggered by a person. My subcutaneous ID chip had been pinged by the jammer's signature. The system assumed I was being compromised. The realizing hit me with a physical jolt. A sudden, rhythmic interference pattern spiked across the screen. It triggered the memory of a checkpoint outside Ramadi. The air had tasted like ozone and scorched rubber. The smell of burnt metal flooded the cabin, a phantom scent so thick I could almost taste the copper. A sudden, sharp rap on my driver's side window made my heart hammer against my ribs. I reached for a sidearm that wasn't there. My fingers brushed empty air. Standing in the shadows was a silhouette I recognized by the posture alone. Judge Harrison Sterling. He opened the passenger door and slid in, bringing the scent of rain and old parchment into my sanctuary. "You're playing a dangerous game, Catherine," he said. "The blue marble isn't just in the pocket anymore, it's being moved." I kept my eyes on the monitor. I didn't turn to face him. "You know what's in that basement?" I know that Julian is a shadow broker for a logistics ring. He handed me a burner phone. The screen was dark, but the weight of it was significant. "The warrant for the gala is signed, but it's contingent on a physical alert from a certified federal censor." "Not a dog, Catherine, an asset." I gripped the phone. The plastic was cold. "Arthur thinks I'm broken. He thinks Bain is a toy. I can't restore your life until you reclaim your partner. But if you fail at the gala, even I can't stop them from burying you for good. You have 48 hours to turn that silence of yours into a weapon." He stepped back out into the dark, vanishing into the mist. I sat in the quiet, the red error codes still blinking on my laptop. The validation gap wasn't just a distance anymore, it was a countdown. My father wanted me to go to Wyoming and disappear. Julian wanted me erased. In the field, when the jammer starts to hum, you don't run, you fix bayonets. I closed the laptop. The blue glow died. I was Catherine Fletcher, and I had my mission. Now, I just had to survive the gala. The military charity gala was a masterclass in atmospheric deception. Under the brilliant glow of crystal chandeliers, the air smelled of expensive lilies and the sharp, ozone tang of high-end floor wax. Hundreds of officers in dress blues moved in a synchronized dance of rank and ego, their medals clinking like tiny, silver wind chimes. I moved through the crowd in a midnight black gown that felt like a shroud. I was unhooked from the world, my hands light and useless at my sides. I didn't belong here. I belonged in a tactical vest with a primary weapon slung over my shoulder. Every pop of a champagne cork sounded like a distant small arms discharge. Every sudden laugh sent a jolt of hypervigilance through my spine. To the socialites around me, I looked like I was spacing out, the very image of the unstable veteran my father had described in court. I spotted Beatrice Fletcher near the center of the ballroom. She was a vision in shimmering silk, laughing as she held Bane's decorative leash. She looked like a queen with a lion on a string, but as I drew closer, the mystery shifted into a sharp, terrifying focus. I watched her lean into the space of a high-ranking logistics colonel. With a sleight of hand, she brushed against his uniform. I saw the glint of black plastic. She slid a slim, encrypted drive into his pocket, with the practiced grace of a seasoned operative. The glint of the drive triggered a sensory spike. The way the light hit the casing reminded me of the sun catching a shard of a detonator cap in the sand. Suddenly, the lilies were gone. The air was thick with the metallic tang of burnt metal and the ionized heat of a live zone. My vision tunneled. I wasn't in a ballroom. I was back in the dust, watching a handoff that shouldn't be happening. My sister wasn't Julian's accomplice. She was the architect. She was using the distraction of my breakdown to facilitate a high-level data breach. "Catherine dear, you look peaky," Beatrice Fletcher said as I stepped into her orbit. She looked at the base commander, who was standing nearby with Arthur Fletcher. "I'm so worried about her." Arthur Fletcher stepped forward. He looked immaculate in his tuxedo, but his face was a mask of weary disappointment. "Catherine, go home, you're making a scene." I didn't move, I didn't defend myself, I looked at Bane. He was sitting perfectly still, but his eyes were dilated. His gaze was fixed on the colonel's pocket. He was holding a target indication, posture that only a handler would recognize. The compressed spring of the last 48 hours reached its maximum tension. My father was trying to erase me. My sister was betraying her country, and the only witness was a dog they thought they'd turned into a toy. "The blue marble," I whispered, the words so low only the three of them could hear. "What?" Arthur Fletcher snapped, his eyes darting around. "It's in the pocket," I said. I saw Beatrice Fletcher's hand tighten on the leash until her knuckles turned white. For a second, the social mask slipped, and I saw the predator underneath. She looked at the base commander, her eyes brimming with rehearsed moisture. "See," she cried softly, "she's talking nonsense again. Please, someone help her." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could feel the burner phone vibrating against my thigh. The mission wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a live operation. I took a slow, deep breath, filtering out the lilies, filtering out the lies. I was Catherine Fletcher, I was a handler, and I was exactly where I needed to be. The spring was about to uncoil. The compressed spring of the evening had reached its absolute limit. The air in the ballroom felt heavy, charged with the static of a brewing storm. Beatrice's voice, a weaponized trill of false concern, continued to echo against the gold-leafed ceiling. "It's the trauma, you see," she whispered to a gathering circle of officers, her eyes glistening with rehearsed moisture. "She doesn't know how to let go. She thinks she's still in the field. It's heartbreaking, really." I stood 10 feet away, a tactical distance. It felt like a continent. I was Catherine Fletcher, the unstable ghost, watching my sister rewrite my soul in real time. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I kept my breathing shallow and my hands loose. Arthur Fletcher stepped closer. His shadow fell over me, cold and long. "Catherine," he said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding rumble. "You are an embarrassment to the uniform you once wore. Security, please escort my daughter to the exit. She needs medical attention. Now." The validation gap was at its widest point. To the audience, I was a tragic figure being gently removed for her own safety. To me, I was an operator watching a breach. 2 base security guards moved toward me, their shoes shined to a mirror finish. Their hands hovered near their belts. I didn't flinch, I didn't argue, instead I shifted my weight. A subtle movement, a change in state from target to ready. I saw Judge Harrison Sterling standing near the base commander. His face was a mask of unreadable stone. He wasn't stopping the guards, he was waiting. I looked at Bain. He was no longer the passive trophy. His hackles were a jagged line beneath the harness. His gaze was locked onto the logistics kernel, specifically, the pocket containing the encrypted drive. He was ignoring Beatrice, Fletcher's frantic, sharp tugs on the silk leash. Suddenly, the smell of the ballroom shifted. The lilies were gone. In its place was the sharp, metallic tang of burnt metal and the ionized heat of a live zone. My vision tunneled. I wasn't at a gala, I was back in the dust, watching the seconds tick down. The narrative was poisoning the room, but the truth was sitting at the end of a silver-studded lead. I took a slow, deep breath, filtering the air for the smell of the fuse. My sister wasn't just erasing me, she was counting on my brokenness to act as the ultimate distraction. She thought my silence was a void. She didn't realize it was a reservoir. The first guard reached for my arm. His fingers brushed the fabric of my gown. "Don't," I said. One word, flat, tactical, it stopped him mid-motion. I looked at Beatrice Fletcher. She saw the shift. The predator in her eyes blinked. She knew the spring was about to uncoil. I didn't need a lawyer, I didn't need my files. I had my partner and I had the signal. The silence was over, the uncoiling had begun. The first guard's hand closed on my bicep. It was a mistake. His grip was soft, civilian, fueled by the assumption that I was a broken thing to be managed. The world slowed down. The phantom weight of my training finally materialized into a physical force. I didn't look at the guard's face. I didn't look at my father. I looked directly into Bain's dilated pupils. I saw the target reflection in his gaze. I issued the command I had been holding since the courthouse. It wasn't a shout. It was a low-frequency vibration. "Pass off, protect." The result was instantaneous. It was violent and beautiful. Bain snapped the decorative silk leash from Beatrice Fletcher's hand. The harness creaked under strain. He struck the logistics kernel with the force of a battering ram. Bain pinned the man's arm to the marble floor, jaws locked inches from the man's throat. Beatrice Fletcher let out a jagged, unrehearsed scream. "Shoot it," Arthur Fletcher roared, his face a panicked shade, the mask disintegrating. The security guards drew their sidearms. The metallic sound echoed through the ballroom. Suddenly, the smell of lilies was gone. The air was thick with metallic tension. I stepped into the line of fire, my body shielding Bain. I didn't raise my hands, I didn't plead, I just stood. The guards froze. They stopped because of the sound of boots. A unit of military police moved in with coordinated precision. They formed a defensive perimeter around me, weapons facing outward. Judge Harrison Sterling stepped forward. He was a man holding a debt. The commander raised a hand, an absolute stop signal. The lead MP officer offered me a clean, sharp salute. "Area secured, Agent Fletcher," he said. "The federal warrant is live. The telemetry from the asset has been verified." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a narrative dying. I unclipped the silver-studded leash and tossed it onto the marble. I pulled out the reinforced tactical lead. I snapped it onto Bain's collar. The weight was right. The alignment was restored. "I'm not the one who's out of control, Arthur," I said. I looked at Beatrice Fletcher. She was on the floor, her composure shattered. "And Bain isn't a gift, he's a federal agent, and he just caught you." The spring had uncoiled. The debt was being collected. I felt Bain's shoulder press against my leg, warm, solid, and real. The validation gap was gone. There was only the mission now. The gala's main display screens suddenly flickered into static. the high society guests froze mid-motion. When the image returned, it was a high-definition tactical feed, grainy and green-tinted with night vision. The room watched as the cream-colored door was breached on screen. The muffled thump from the monitors felt like a physical pulse. The camera revealed a military-grade signal intelligence array beneath the estate. Tactical teams moved through, hauling out crates of hardware and currency. The screen showed a ledger being flipped open. It was Beatrice Fletcher's handwriting. The ballroom smell shifted for me into a memory of collapse and truth. I turned to Beatrice Fletcher. She was no longer a queen, but a woman turning pale. Her hands shook so violently, the champagne glass shattered. She looked at me, her mouth working but no sound coming out. You needed his biometric clearance to walk that encrypted drive out the front gate. I walked toward my father. Arthur Fletcher looked ancient. He looked at the screen as agents dismantled his legacy. You traded your daughter for a clean record. Arthur Fletcher couldn't look at me, his shoulders slumped. Julian tried to run for the exit. A military police officer intercepted him and took him down. Bain stayed at my side, calm and alert. I turned my back on them, the tension finally released. MPs began rounding them up, cuffs clicked sharply. The elite guests stood back, realizing the truth. I didn't look back as they led Beatrice Fletcher away. I didn't look back as Arthur Fletcher was read his rights. I headed for the doors. I had my partner, I had the signal. The Fletcher name didn't belong to them anymore. The night air outside the base was sharp. It tasted of jet fuel, damp earth, and an expansive, terrifying freedom. I sat on the lowered tailgate of my SUV, the cold metal biting through the thin fabric of my gown. Beside me, Bain sat in a relaxed, alert posture, his head resting on my boot. The sirens behind me faded into a low hum. Red and blue lights fractured across wet pavement. Inside the hall, the Fletcher name was being dismantled. Out here, there was only the wind. A silhouette detached itself from the shadows of the command center. I recognized the gate. Judge Harrison Sterling approached under amber streetlights. He stopped a few feet away, looking at Bain, then at me. He handed me a thick, worn physical folder. It was the blackout file, my real history. It wasn't your family that put the seal on this, Catherine, he said. I needed you to be erased, so they would get sloppy. I took the file. The tactile reality grounded me. You used me as bait, I said. I used you as a censor, he corrected gently. You were never broken, you were just undercover. He nodded once and walked back toward the command center lights. I sat there for a long time, watching distant blue lights. I remembered the courtroom, the smell, the lies. A scent hit me, the metallic tang of burnt metal and engine heat. My heart didn't spike, my hands didn't shake, I just absorbed it. I wasn't a victim of my memories anymore, I was the owner of them. Ownership isn't granted by a court or a patriarch. I hadn't lost a family tonight, I had shed a skin. Arthur and Beatrice were gone from my life. I hopped off the tailgate, my movements were silent and economical. Bain hopped into the passenger side before I issued the command. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The low hum of the vehicle vibrated through the floorboards. I checked my mirrors, no one was following. I put the car in drive and moved forward. The road out of the base stretched into an unknown horizon. I am Catherine Fletcher, I am a handler, the mission is finally my own. The end of a story is rarely just the conclusion of a sequence of events, it is the settling of a moral dust. We live in a world that often confuses ownership with authority and loud proclamations with absolute truth. We are taught to respect the polished surface, the high society pedigree, and the titles carved into mahogany doors. But true value doesn't reside in the curation of an image. It is found in the quiet, structural integrity of a life lived with purpose. To respect a person is to acknowledge the unseen miles they have walked and the burdens they carry in silence. When we underestimate the quiet ones, we do so at our own peril. Silence is not a void, it is a reservoir of strength, waiting for the right moment to uncoil. Philosophy teaches us that truth is not a destination, but a state of alignment. It is the Stoic realization that we possess sovereignty over our own response. There is a profound dignity in the unblinking gaze that refuses to flinch. Loyalty isn't an emotional display, it is a structural necessity. We are defined not by what we take, but by what we refuse to let others take from us. In the end, the only legacy that survives the fire is built on truth. Integrity is the silent partner that stays when the chandeliers go dark. It is the steady pulse in the dark, the internal compass that points north. Thank you for walking this path with us. Stories like these remind us that truth has a way of shattering the glass. If this narrative resonated with you, we'd value your perspective. To stay connected with more stories, consider following and subscribing. Your support ensures these voices continue to be heard. Stay steady and stay grounded.